All right. Thank you everyone for coming. We are here January 13th for a school board workshop. We are going to be doing our self-evaluation review with our WASDA trainer, Cindy McMullen. Cindy is, like I said, a WASDA trainer, a former WASDA president, and she currently serves as a school board member for the Central Valley School District. So, Cindy, did you want to do a little bit of introductions before we get started?
That would be wonderful if you
Okay.
would do that. So I don't think you necessarily need to know much more about me other than when I started on my school board, my hair was nice and dark like Maria's and Catherine's. And I spent 24 years on the board and thought, well, you know, it's taken me twice as long to graduate as anybody in the district. Maybe I should move on. And then I spent 4 years at the State Board of Education, and I really missed being where the action is. And so I was very lucky. My area seat opened up again. Nobody else signed up for it. So at 4 o'clock on the Friday of filing, I put my name in, and then I called my superintendent and I said, I have some bad news for you. You're going to have a new old school board member. And so I've been on the board again for another 7 years. I just find it challenging and rewarding, and lately challenging and rewarding. So if I get each of you to tell me a little bit about you, in particular, how long you've been on this wonderful board, and maybe what your number one focus personally is for the work that you're doing. So Martin, you want to start us off, please?
Okay, ambush.
I better turn this.
Oh, I should have turned that on.
Oh, yeah, nobody heard what you said.
Okay, I'll say it again. I'm Martin Barron. I've been on the board. This is my 4th year. I think there are many, many priorities. I'll give a better answer than I did with the mic turned off. But fundamentally, we need to work for investment in education. And I use the oath of office as kind of a mantra that I look at when I figure out what we should be doing as we balance all the other areas we work on.
Hi there, Laura Jakes. This is my 20th year on the board, and my primary focus is to work with the differing perspectives on the board to bring about the best educational experience for students.
My name is Julie Norton. I think this is going into my 3rd year on the board. I have 3 students in the district. So part of my focus is just really improving the quality of education and making sure that all students are challenged at their appropriate levels and that our students are thriving. Maria Iniguez, I've been on the board for 3 years, and my why and reasoning is I think it's highly important that we meet each and every student where they're at and look at them as a whole and to be able to serve them specifically with the needs that they need so that they can reach high academic standards.
And I am Catherine Thomas. I have been on the board just a little over a year now. I, like Julie, have a child in the district. She's a junior at the high school. And my reason for joining the board was to try to help give our students the highest quality education they could receive.
Bill Eagle, interim superintendent. Goals from me. I'm here to help keep the momentum of the district moving forward in a variety of areas, from the fiscal stuff to operational items and also the student learning aspect. And overall, I think the goal of the district really is around producing students who are ready for their futures. We want students to graduate, and we want students to graduate ready to pursue vocational training, college, or a career, whatever their choices are.
Thank you all very much. It's wonderful to hear all of that and to know that your focus, every single one of you talked about what you needed to do for kids. And that your focus isn't on something like we need new buildings or we need more bus routes or those kinds of things, but you are clearly focused on what it is that is our mission and our responsibility. And Martin, I love the fact that you would take us back to the oath that we say every time we're sworn in again after we've been elected or once we've been elected. Sometimes it's easy to move on from that, especially the very first time when you're so excited and you're also so nervous because you're thinking, what did I get myself into here? But to go back and look at that and think about the promise that we've made to our community, to our schools, and to our children in particular. And I particularly like that you all have a promise. Many districts have a vision, but you all have a promise to your students, to the folks in your community, that you will build that foundation of diversity, equity, and inclusion from which each student emerges future ready. That just encapsulates everything that you all talked about. Meeting students where they are, and the bottom line, making them ready for whatever their future is, and giving them the maximum education and knowledge and skills so that they can make the choice that's right for them. So what are we going to do this afternoon? Well, first, we're going to go over our responsibilities as board members, and then whether or not it even matters what we do on the board. You know, we're not in classrooms, we're not dealing directly with students. So does it matter if the board is doing a good job, if the board is focused? Yes, it matters a lot. We'll look at just a little bit of research, just so that we know how it informs issues around our boardsmanship. And then we'll dive into your self-evaluation that you did with the WASDA tool. And I'll just remind you that each of you filled out the form individually, unless you did it differently than every other board I've worked with, like you didn't all collaborate and sit around and share answers, right? Okay, so that gives you a much broader picture of the work you're doing and maybe the places that you're doing really wonderfully in, that you want to keep doing that, and maybe some that now that you've got those ones down, you're ready to move into something more. So the key work of a school board is to set the vision for your district. You are the long range folks. You are looking at where you want to be in at least 5 years. And with your focus on future ready for your students, clearly you've thought about that. You look at standards. You establish what quality is. The way you do that is by not just adopting your curriculum, but also by looking at your assessments. See how well that curriculum's doing. See how well your students are doing in that curriculum. You are the ultimate folks for accountability. You were elected, among many other things, to be the ones who look at what's going on up close and personal and finding out how well things are going. Holding your staff, primarily through your superintendent, accountable for what outcomes you want. It's important to have everything in alignment. There's the analogy of being in a rowboat or maybe in a raft going down rapids. If you're not all paddling together, it can be dangerous. It can be scary. And it can also be counterproductive to all of the energy that you're putting into the work that you're doing. You all also have a large part in setting the climate in your district. If you are positive, if you are working together, if you are telling the story of what is good in your district and working on the things that need improvement, that climate is in your schools then, and it's in your community. And like most communities, you are the center here in Wenatchee. You are the place that most people are connected to. So when your climate is good, that helps the overall climate of the community. Working in collaboration with one another sometimes can be challenging, especially when we have different viewpoints. But Laura, I loved that you said that your focus is on hearing all the different perspectives and then trying to bring those together in a way that benefits your students. Particularly, one of the things on my board, we have older members like me, and then we have younger members like Maria or Julie or Catherine. Not that I don't think that you two are young, at least at heart. But what's wonderful about that is that there are different perspectives. We're in different places in our lives, and we see what our students might need at different times in their lives. Or we have different experiences, and we can rely on those to help inform the decisions we make. But we need to do that collaborating with one another, certainly with our superintendent. The superintendent needs to be in collaboration with his senior staff and, quite frankly, everybody in the district. And of course, what we're all looking for is continuous improvement, not just for our kids, but for us. The more we know about what good education is and what a good way to deliver it, the better it is for our kids. So anything in that strikes you as something that you've been focusing on, say, over the last year?
If getting the word out about what is working and what is working well was something that was very important to me. For instance, learning about the structured literacy that's going on in the PLCs, going in and learning about that, and we've had workshops on them, was illuminating and fantastic, and seeing what good work they were doing and how well it was working was something that I wanted then to communicate to the community so that they could get behind it as well and see the good things that were happening instead of the difficult or bad things. So that was something that I was focused on in the last year.
Great. And it sounds like that you were able to get those messages out to your community, answer questions about things that they maybe didn't know so much about, and share the good news. Wonderful. Anybody else? This is a participatory experience.
Okay, you need some help, right? In one sense, the answer is all of them, but in another sense, I'm going to pick up on continuous improvement. And actually, I'm going to link it to a couple of comments I made at Tuesday's board meeting, only I left the continuous out of it. We get feedback from different people, such as stakeholders, and some of it is critical, some of it's tough language, some of it's appreciative, but what it shows you is a pathway to improvement. And so I think we had a pretty good lesson of that within the last week. And, you know, no matter how you can stumble, you succeed, as Bill did, you recognize with great credit, in this case, the athletics achievements, you stimulate people and encourage them. But the whole goal is that you are trying to do better all the time.
Thank you, Martin. You know, one of the things that for me is very difficult, not so much in my school boarding, although it spills over there, but in my just normal life, is that I think I should be doing everything really, really well. And certainly at my age, right? I should have gotten this down. I should be doing everything really, really well. Well, there's just no way in a school system that you can be doing absolutely everything, in an exemplary fashion every minute of every day. Even if you leave out weekends, even if you leave out the summer. And so there are times when what we're focused on is not the thing that's starting to be an issue. But like you say, Martin, it's often pointed out to us, and then we're able to shift our focus and be able to put our good work to that. Laura.
So in the past year, my observation is that we're focused on change. We have had change. We've had change in board composition. We've had change in superintendency, and we're anticipating additional change with upcoming redistricting and school board elections and the hiring of a superintendent. You may know that we're all 5 seats will be up for election because of the redistricting that we're implementing in the next election, the next general election. So there's been a lot of transition, and I feel like the board's focus has been mainly on that. And in addition, though, before we had a superintendency shift, our focus was on the strategic plan that's pretty much hot off the presses, and now beginning to focus on our big 6, which we have printed off on the wall over there, and aligning our resources to those new goals.
Goodness, you guys have been busy this last year. That is a huge lift to be. It's sort of like sending a man to the moon. You have everything ready to go now, and you can take off. Maria, how about you?
I think with what Laura has said, collaboration, I think we've been able to, as a board, been able to continue that collaboration for the well-being of our district and our students. We've had continuous change, yet we have been able to continue that collaborative piece, whether it's amongst us as board, with the superintendent. So I think we've definitely done a great job, and have personally focused on that piece of it.
You are to be commended. It is harder, I think, to collaborate during change than it is at times when you're riding the waves of what you've already set up. And to be able to hear different voices and different perspectives and work together and blend all of that into your new strategic plan. Congratulations. That's wonderful. Julie?
I think we've made some considerable improvements on being accountable and transparent over this last year. Especially going into this year, we've now found ourselves with a budget deficit, and we've been very transparent with the process, with what the budget looks like, what some of the tougher decisions we're going to be facing, and then very collaborative in the process as well, engaging the staff in the schools, the board, the forming committees, things of that nature. So I think overall, between adopting our strategic plan and being accountable to what is our measurements in that plan, and checking in on those, but also in some of these other things that are coming up, we're being much more transparent, accountable as we're going.
And that is something that is so tremendously important. You are not the only district facing budget issues. In fact, there are very few districts in the state that will not be looking at that for all kinds of different reasons. As the needs of our children at least stay the same, if not be growing, financial resources have dwindled now that we don't have ESSER again. And looking at where we put all of our resources is going to be a really important thing. And so to have established that transparency and have built that trust in your community that you don't want to make these decisions, but you will make them carefully and with your students as the focus, that's a wonderful thing to already have in place. So we know that the most important adult in a student's life, not in a child's life, but in a student's life, are their teachers and their parents. And we know that for teachers, the most important people for them in their profession are their peers and their principals. But what about those of us who are either at the central office or are elected board members who maybe have 1 or 2 meetings a month? Do we make any difference in what's going on? Well, that hasn't been studied as much as the work that's been done on those proximal factors. We're distal factors, we're at a distance. But there has been some really good work done. There was a study called the Lighthouse Study, and also a study done by a couple of different groups, one McCarthy and Ramsey, and one Lutz and Econocone. And those studies have been reviewed and built upon by Lorenzen and McCaw. And we have had the opportunity at WASDA's conferences to have Professor Lorenzen actually come and present. And if you get an opportunity to hear him and hear him explain the impact of boards and the senior staff on the district and therefore on the students, I'd really encourage you. He's very engaging and he makes us think. But the thing that he talks about is that it's the relationship. None of us do it alone, but the relationship is the connection of all of us together. And the old saying, more than just the sum of its parts, absolutely. When we are in sync, when we are respectful of one another, when we value the roles and responsibilities and the input that each one of us has, then we build something much bigger than just 5 board members and a superintendent and a senior staff. We build something that can make a real difference. But it takes everybody. And so, like you say, reaching out to the community is so important. Doing our work in a vacuum or doing our work really focused, which I'll be honest with you, 20 years ago, that's pretty much what we did. Nobody came to board meetings unless you were talking about a coach or you were talking about potentially not having a sport. Then, I mean, if I came to a board meeting and the parking lot was full, I was thinking, oh boy, what's going on in high school sports? Now our community is much more engaged. And they have viewpoints based on information that they have that may or may not really be what's going on in your buildings, in what's happening with your students. But it is their perspective, and their perspective is their reality. So we have to be able to engage with them and explain to them what we really are doing and what we're aiming at, why we're doing what we're doing, and where we hope to get. And so that accountability, that transparency that you talked about, Julie, critical, and is going to be really important for you all as you redistrict and you basically come up with almost like a new school district. You're going to have the same outside boundaries, but everything inside is going to be different. What an opportunity, but also what a challenge. So we know that high-performing boards behave differently than low-performing boards. And WASDA has been part of, or I'm sorry, Washington school districts have been part of a study done, quite honestly, I think in Montana, of what things high performing boards do as opposed to what not so high performing boards do. The reason that it matters is because when we address things within our control, so we stay in our lane, in our place, we're creating environments, and those environments can overcome social injustices and inequities. Now, that's not meant to be political. I know right now that's what we think when we hear social injustices, but we know that every student comes from a different household, a different background. They have different strengths, and every one of us has a challenge, at least one. In my case, my challenges, I think, outweigh the other side. So my poor teachers, they had a lot of work to do. But if we as a board superintendent team look at creating an environment that addresses those things that are getting in the way of our children learning the very best that they can, and see what it is we can do about that, then we help create that condition where every student achieves at a high level. And I know that that's your goal. Maria, you did a beautiful job of articulating that. And so if we keep that in the forefront, this is all about the kids. This is about their achievement. This, as Bill said, is about them being future ready. Ultimately future ready, but also next year in the next grade ready, high school ready, as they move along. And we look at what conditions we want to set that makes that happen or support that, and what conditions we want to make sure we're working on getting out of the way. That's really where it is that we have the impact. So you can look at the next page and see what folks who are not as good as you are doing, because you certainly are not a low performing board. You clearly have your act together. You spend time focused on student achievement. You're working collaboratively. You work as a governance team. And that part is really important, that this is not, again, it's that sort of paddling in the raft. Everyone is working together. And you focus on policy, which is how we govern, is adopting policies and giving direction to our superintendent. So the next page really highlights the work that you all are doing. Clearly, and Catherine, I think you brought this out, you are communicating high expectations for all students, not just to your superintendent or each other, but through your superintendent and through your actions, things you do at the board, recognitions you do at the board level, or directives you give to your superintendent, that you have high expectations for all your students. You treat all individuals who come before you with respect. And although I'm not really sure what happened at your last board meeting, I can kind of interpolate a little bit, because I'm sure it's like some things that have happened at our board meetings, where folks have come and not necessarily been real excited with whatever it was that was going on, a little upset, but still, they deserve respect. Even if they're not giving you respect, sometimes that's the hardest time to do it. But I happen to think that's the most important time to do it. That culture of collaboration, where you all model how to work together with a shared purpose. And then that then is something that the rest of the district folks do. And it strongly impacts our kids, because everybody is moving in the same direction. The focus is the same. Your belief that every student can learn to a high level is really, really important. If we don't believe that, then the decisions that we make are certainly not going to support that outcome. And probably the one that's always sort of the one that we don't do as well. I will tell you, every board that I've worked with on self-evaluation, one of the lowest ranking things is bringing on new board members. Sometimes I think it's difficult. The other thing is that it's sort of like jumping into the middle of a marathon. I mean, everybody else is running and you're trying to figure out how to get in a lane and how to run too. So if that comes up in one of the things that quote needs improvement, don't feel badly. We all are sort of there. So again, we work through policy. And so we are there to ensure that our students receive a curriculum, support, and supplemental materials necessary for high achievement. We commit to clear and shared purposes and honor the roles and responsibilities that we have and that the superintendent has. And we look at things from what's best for our student success. Does this ring with you as what you see as what a board member's job is? So many years ago, in about 2008, WASDA set about developing its board standards. I'm happy to say that a new updated version will be out in the next couple of months. So when you do this next year, it will probably look a little bit different. But they divided all those roles and responsibilities into 5 categories. And those are the 5 categories that you used in your self-evaluation. So school district governance, communication and commitment to high expectations for student learning, creating conditions for district-wide and student and staff success, holding the district accountable, and engaging the community. So you have a couple of documents that are the results of your self-evaluation. And the big fat one, we're going to use as sort of a encyclopedia or a resource document. So we're not, good news, you don't have to read every page in here, and certainly you don't have to go through it with me. But there is this ranking sheet, and this is a collation of, first of all of your opinions, and then looking at it from the things that you indicated you were doing well, through the things that you're doing just fine with, down to the ones where maybe you want to look at and focus. But first, I'm going to give you the aggregate data, and I apologize for not having handed this out before. This is a color graph. It also shows you past years. Now, this may not include you individually as a board member. So some of these years may be before you got here. But this is how the board looked at its performance in those various years. And part of what is helpful is that in some cases, you can see growth. You can see maybe more understanding of what you are doing, or more focus on what you wanted to do. You will notice that in past years, the board, or at least some members of the board, have felt that you were never doing some of the things on the standards. There are very, very few times in your self-evaluation where you feel you are never doing whatever that one question in that category was. But we'll look at that and see what that is, and see how you might want to address that. By and large, in most of these, you have ranked yourself as always or most of the time meeting the standard generally. That doesn't mean that each little subsection you feel that you've done as well as you would like to. But that is a good report on yourself, that very broadly, you are meeting all of the standards. And that's not an easy thing to do, because that's a lot of work and that's a lot of different things to juggle. But you'll also see that in each one of those categories, somewhere between 25% and 50% of the time is some of the time. And so those might be areas where you want to build and get those up to a most of the time kind of a circumstance. So that's the really, really high level of what you as a group evaluated yourselves at. Anything in particular from this? What I can't remember is I think you took this in late October, early November, late October, I think. Yeah. Okay, because it was before the WASDA conference. Okay. So one of the things that would be interesting and keep in the back of your mind, if I answered this question today, would I have a different answer? Because it's very clear that you are a growing board and that your skills and talents are growing in these roles. And so it might be that you're farther along than you thought you were then. And we can talk about that as we go. So if you would take the one that's called Board Self-Assessment Survey Score Ranking. And what I'd like you to do is just look at the first 2 pages. WASDA has highlighted in sort of a light blue-green some of those are your highest ranking ones. But you have ranked yourself as a 3, which in my book is a B, which is pretty good, all the way down through almost to the end of the 2nd page. So here are a couple things about this chart and how it's set up. The first number is the average of the grades that you gave yourself. The second number, the second column, is the minimum grade that you gave yourself. And the next one is the maximum grade. So in almost all of these on the first page, you'll notice that basically you're in pretty close agreement. It's you either gave yourself a 3 or a 4. There were a couple where you gave yourself a 2. Some of you gave yourselves 2. The next column is standard deviation, and I can't explain to you what that is because I was a poli-sci major in college, but I know it has something to do with the differences on how you see each other. The next one is which question, so that you can go find the question and read it again if you're thinking, really? And then a short explanation. The next one is which standard does it fall under? And then the short statement of what the standard is. So what I'd ask you to do for, we'll take about 5 minutes. I'd ask you to go through these first 2 pages and find similarities, and then maybe something that kind of surprises you a little bit about one or more of these. Okay, so you can continue to review it and have your great insights as we talk about it. What is it that first struck you about these things, especially the ones that WASDA highlighted, which are the ones that you're doing very, very well? Laura?
So I just am interested in those standards where we have a broader disparity in our opinions about how we're doing. The min maxes that were 2 and 4 are interesting to me. There were just 3 of those on the first page, quite a few more on the second page. So it's interesting.
The ones on the first page focus around your budget and your financial status. And I'm wondering if there's been any change in how you all look at this from, say, in October. Because it sounded to me like maybe you've taken some steps since October.
We do.
And maybe this situation, is a little different in your minds.
Perhaps we have had a change in the accounting department, so that might lead to a difference in the way each of us would rate those questions.
Yeah, I think I distinguish between the ranking and actually what's happening. I think there being, and I would credit district with board cheering them on with the changes that have happened since October.
So maybe some of the concerns that those of you who said 2 on this one, so and 2 is some of the time. Maybe some of your concerns have been addressed. Certainly, if you're looking at dealing with a tight budget, these are things that you as a board with your superintendent and obviously with your financial department and maybe your HR department, I'm not sure, will have to be very transparent about. The part, it's paradoxical. At least it seems that way to me. That when we feel a restricted budget, we tend to be better at that at those clear guidelines than when we have more money, and we tend to have more general guidelines like let's do great things for kids. And then we listen to our staff explain to us what great things those could be. When we don't have a lot of money and we have to start not doing some of the things that we're doing, then our guidelines usually become much clearer and our parameters become tighter. But maybe that's not your experience. That's the experience that I've had. It's sort of like, oh, we have enough money that you could do that too. Or no, we don't have enough money to do everything that we want to do, or that we even have been doing. So have you started on talking about parameters or focuses as you're looking at dealing with next year's budget? Catherine?
Yes, and I would say that my opinion or my answers on the survey would change immensely. I believe, and I credit Bill for that. Frankly, this mistake was dropped in his lap literally as our other superintendent was walking out the door. But he has really been focused on. He went out into every school to make every district employee aware of what was going on. Absolute transparency went out specifically to keep them, in the loop of what was going on. Then has put together different videos on how the budget works for the public to view, for the teachers and the staff to view, to understand, that there are different buckets for the funds, and that, we can't just take the transportation fund and use it to keep staff when we have this issue that we have. And then has formed a budget committee with the board, and then has had some kind of budget presentation really at every board meeting recently. And it has been, and I'm not a numbers girl, I'm not a finance girl, and he was a math teacher forever, and a great math teacher. So he's really been teaching, at least me and the community, how the budget works and what we're going to do about it. And I think that's been just phenomenal. I can't say enough good things about him doing that. So.
You were going to make
Oh,
some comments too.
yeah, I was actually gonna just highlight some of the things that we've done since maybe August to now relating to transparency to the budget, but she, I think, said them all. So yeah, just publicly getting out there that this is a issue we're facing, a piece dealing with it at every board meeting now, an update of sorts, forming this committee to really early in the process. Normally, in my experience in these last 3 years, we haven't heard about budgeting until we start getting to April. So to be way out in front and regularly updating and then posting information on the websites for the community to see and understand it better. I think that transparency has been improved tremendously.
Is that the consensus among you? Okay, I'm seeing heads nodding. It's not fun to be in a situation like where your budget is very tight. Our district is the same thing. Some things didn't go quite the way they were projected. And we're going to do some significant budget tightening. Quite frankly, our brand new superintendent has put all of us on a diet. And it's going to be a very strict one for probably a couple of years to make it through. But the same thing like you, start early, tell the truth, talk about what we can do to address the issue, what we're going to do to address the issue. So Laura, does that, how does that fit with what you were looking at?
Sure. That definitely addresses two of the three disparities that we had on the first page. The other one on the first page was about communicating the expectation that all classrooms will implement effective instructional practices. I'm not sure why we have such a difference of thought on that, or if it still exists. I'm not sure.
And maybe it's the question of, well, I don't know what it is. As you all have learned about more of the instructional practices used in your classrooms, and I don't know, maybe, I mean, you can't learn about everything every year. So maybe that hasn't been a focus for you lately, since obviously the budget is. But what are the concerns that you all might have around how instruction is being implemented in your district?
I'm just going to make a suggestion, that maybe, this is a COVID leftover. We went through some rocky times the last couple of years, and since this survey was done in October, we really didn't have a lot of everybody in classroom experience. So maybe that tainted some board members thinking about it.
Very insightful. Thank you, Laura. Mark?
Yeah, I'm going to link that a little bit to, last year was our first self-assessment in a while. And you'll notice if you look at the histories, there's some gaps there. So I want to introduce what Laura said. And one of the things that I think I learned from last year, and maybe we've got less of this year, is to look not only at the low ratings, but at the high standard distributions and the differences in the board. Both of those indicate that we don't understand each other or we're not satisfied with how things are going. And so, but picking up on that as far as instruction is concerned, if I think back over it, I think, yes, you're right. There's been disruption, COVID, not testing, changes in educational technology and philosophy, I think, as you said, over the years. And I think, but I think there is, if you were to go back a year, I would think there might have been more differences in expectations of individual board members based on their background than you would have now as you become more familiar. And that might be a factor of 2 versus 4. I think, and as we're learning, except for Laura, we're relatively new. So the difference between thinking it's always covered or sometimes covered may just be familiarity. But when I went through the first 2 pages, I have a question. You wanted us to look at the first 2 pages, the green section, not the red section. We're going to look at the red section later. Okay, we're going to stick on the green section. So I really, I saw 114, and that was what it was my scope for difference. I can kind of see where that comes from. I also think there's a dilemma between, does the public write the budget or does the school district write the budget? And how well informed is the public? So I can see that being a technical issue as to who's in charge. But the one I wanted to focus on, and I guess I'll fess up because I got to the red section, is we have policy 1810 and policy 1820. Actually, I'm going to go back to orientation. You said orientation is an area where boards are often weak. Well, I'll give you a happy secret. Hey, Catherine. We are going to talk about orientation and updating ourselves on orientation at our next policy committee meeting. So, thank you, Kim, over there too, for that. But actually, we touched on those topics a year ago, but because it was the first time for me anyway, that I had gone through this kind of self-assessment. And so we realized that there was some difference in some of our policies in that area of board performance, not education performance, not assessing it, how we work as a governance team that we needed to work on. And I think this is very encouraging. If you take 2021 and then 2018, every one of these aggregate one is actually kind of on a nice trend. But before you pat ourselves on the back, we better make sure that A, it's real, and B, we keep it up. But the other thing I was going to say on the 2 policies, we're doing our assessment and we're doing it religiously. And I'm really pleased because that took an effort last year and it took an effort to push it through everything else that was happening this year to get it to happen. And it's the 5 characteristics, but there's policy 1810 where we write annual goals related to these 5 things. And I'm going to just say it. We haven't written goals. We've striven to do those things. We've actually worked really hard with the superintendent on goals, but we haven't worked as hard on ourselves in a formal structural goal sequence. And I was the president last year, so you can shoot me. And I think, this is one of my questions for this meeting is how do we go to the next stage where we, the board, have some structure for working on that. So yeah, I kind of touched on orientation, ourselves versus everybody else. And I think basically with quite a degree of uncertainty in measurement of what we're doing.
Really?
So part of my thought and why there's some disparity in some of these questions is how literally you might read the question itself. How often one could interpret this as how often do we communicate? I think we all have in our minds that we have this clear expectation that every classroom is will implement effective educational practices, but how often do we as the board communicate that? We know that that's what we expect, and we relay that when we do communicate it, but how frequently or often do we make that a focus of what we're doing? That could be another reason that you're seeing some disparity in the question. We know we always have that expectation, but we may not always express it at our board level or push that down maybe enough. And so you're seeing a range.
That's very insightful. And it is one of the things that actually can be the easiest to address. Your board meetings are business meetings or workshops. They're focused on getting the work done and on learning about things that are going on in your district so that you can get the work done. But they are also one of your major communication pieces to your community. And you can take that opportunity to not only share information that you're learning, but share your expectations, your goals, how this fits in the strategic plan, the thing that you're talking about. You can use it to tie all sorts of things together. And so looking at how you do that in a board meeting, whether it's part of your agenda, for example, in our agenda, everything has a little note on it that tells us which section of our strategic plan this connects to. Is this teaching and learning? Is this sustainable operations? Is this buildings and safety? Wherever it is. And so that's just a highlight right away so that we go, oh, okay, yeah, that's where that fits. Yes, we're working on that particular part of the strategic plan. The other thing that we developed this year was a set of questions that we asked that whenever staff makes a presentation to us, we realized we were asking the same questions of people when they came to talk to us, but we didn't tell them ahead of time what the questions were. And that didn't seem to be particularly fair. And most of our staff doesn't really want to spend their every other Monday night sitting in a board meeting. They have already done a whole lot of work and they deserve to be home with their families. So they don't need to have to come to the board meeting to figure out what questions we're going to ask. So we developed a set of questions that we figured we were asking most of the time and that met our basic needs about whatever was being presented. The first one is, why do you want us to do this? Or why do we need to do this? Now, sometimes it's the legislature just gave us another mandate, or a court case has just changed some part of this policy, and so we need to update it. It might be because coming out of our professional learning communities, we have identified this as being something we really want to do, and we need the board to adopt a policy that supports it. We want to know the budget impact. So we ask for that. And then we also ask, who is this going to impact? And that could be anybody from staff. So we're talking about, this is a professional development track that we're looking at. Let's say it's curriculum. Well, that's going to affect staff. That's going to affect students. That's going to affect families, especially in the math area. In my household, that would have a major effect. Because I might not be able to help my student with that kind of thing. So you start to think about some of the other issues that might feed into it. I know that the staff has been really appreciative of the fact that we have sort of a set, we've identified some focuses that we want to be sure that we're hitting on every decision we make. They appreciate the fact that they know what those are so that they can, in their presentation, address that. And then maybe we delve into it deeper, that thing about Who is this going to impact? Or, okay, this is going to cost some money. Where is this coming from? Is it already in the budget? Okay, it's in the curriculum budget and it's within that amount. You've addressed that. You've told us two things. We show our community that we're looking at that and we're being responsible for that. And secondly, that we as a board, we know exactly where this is and how this fits. That might be something that you want to think about too. Some questions that you ask your staff. You can see how basic they are. I mean, they're not brilliant questions. They're just the basics. But it establishes kind of a format too that staff gets used to. And maybe you have other particular things as well. Maybe there's a particular goal that you have identified in that area under your strategic plan for this year. And you ask, how is this furthering that goal? If there is one. So that might be something that you want to think about. That will help you both in focusing on it, but it will also help you in that communicating question. So, you know, we're okay. This is the first year after we have the new math curriculum. We're looking at how well it's doing. We're doing overall assessments. How difficult was it for the staff to implement it? How are the kids getting it? Those kinds of questions. That's another way of finding out, is everybody using the new math curriculum? I will tell a story on my district. There was a time about 15 years ago where we adopted a new math curriculum and for our elementaries, and one of our elementary schools really didn't think it was the right curriculum. The previous curriculum was much, much better. And so when we got our test results back, we sort of noticed that elementary school was an outlier and not in a positive way. And so the question was, what's happening here? Everybody seems to be growing, and we found out why. We anticipated that everybody was implementing the new curriculum. That was certainly the expectation. I'm not saying that anything like that would ever happen in your district, but it's not a bad idea to ask. In our case, we had to raid the building over the summer and confiscate the previous books. And I understand that the teachers, they honestly felt that the new math curriculum was not as good. That unfortunately was not their decision to make. They needed to implement what was adopted district-wide, obviously with professional development support to be able to do that. So, you know, and some of this is, Julie, I think you're exactly right. We're doing it in our heads. We're doing it in the board meeting, looking at things. We're not necessarily making statements out in the world. This doesn't mean that if you belong to the Rotary, you have to always, at every meeting, make all these statements to the community. They might ask you to leave. But there are opportunities that you can do that. And I think the number one that comes to mind for me is always your board meeting, or if you have any kind of newsletter that you send out in the community, or maybe even the schools send it out, that working with your superintendent, that the schools have something that emphasizes one of the things that you want to communicate. I have to tell you that I think that your number one in this, the appropriate delegation of authority to your superintendent, that's a very important one to have top of the list. And it is very often a difficult one. because we get into this because we love our kids and we want them to do really well. And we have connections to the schools and we want to use them and we want to be helpful. And honestly, your recognition that the most helpful thing you can be to your superintendent is not in his way. You're to be commended for that. The other thing that I'd say to you is that you are very strong in standard 3, which is creating conditions for district-wide for student and staff success. And in my book, that's the most important one. Now, obviously, you can't just do that one. You got to do them all to a certain degree. But if you're going to be really good at something, being really good at that one is a good one to start, or it's a good one to focus
Yeah.
on. Laura?
Yeah, I was just doing a little tabulating on that one and well, on all the standards really, and I noticed what you said is that standard 3 was one that we rated ourselves the highest on, but it's also the one where we had the greatest disparity on the most items on pages 1 and 2. So we had in pages 1 and 2, 7 instances of 2 or more, points difference. And on the others, we never had any more than 2 on standards 1, 2, 3, and 4. So while we rated ourselves highly in that area, we also seem to have a greater degree of disagreement around it. And I also noticed that on responsible governance, we are approximately equally rated ourselves as that was our highest, one of our highest strengths and also one of our lowest. So how do we interpret that?
And sometimes it's the specific question within the general area. So is there a particular question that you've looked at, any of you, that you want to discuss that idea of, yeah, we think we're doing really well on average, but some of us are not quite so sure. And again, is it something that maybe has changed either because you've learned more about what's going on or because you've made changes?
Well,
Maria?
I wanted to say one more thought I had on that, creating conditions for student and staff success. I'm pleased that of all the 5, at least that's the one we rated the highest, that our focus is on student success. And that means a lot to me and to our kids.
Thank you. Maria?
I'm not sure I have input, but just looking at question number 48, which had, I think, the only 1 to 4 minimum and max rating there. Like Julie said, is it the interpretation of the survey taker? Because I'm looking at specifically question 48, seek public input during the budget process. In my mind, I'm thinking, yeah, we have a process. We do seek public input. We notify, we have public notices, anybody can come have access to the budget. So to me, it's very clear that we do have it. But could it be the interpretation that are we doing enough, right? Yeah, we have this, but are we providing a town hall? Are we, we do provide a public hearing. So again, is it process versus what we would like to see? Because the 2-3 budgets I've been involved in approving, we have followed the process of creating an environment that does allow for public input. And to see that it's never been done, that somebody took the survey and said it's never been done. Well, is it because it wasn't done to that person's standard?
And I'm also wondering if it's just, I really don't know what it is. But what I've seen is there hasn't been a public connection. And so maybe this is as you learn more about how you do the budget. This also might change in the kind of deliberations that you have to do for the upcoming budget. Because it's not a continuing to do the things we've been doing budget. I will say that there's, so if you've established your program for your students, and basically what you're doing is you're continuing it and you're building the next step that you've had in the strategic plan or something like that, often you don't get a lot of public connection to it. They already know what you're doing or they're happy with what's going on. When you get into a situation like your district and my district is in, there's a different need for public comment and public input when you have to start taking things away because you don't have the money to pay for them. So you may want to have a little different approach to the public input. When we had to cut our budget in 2008, 9, and 10, we had surveys and we did have a couple of town halls because it was a different circumstance. And that might be something, that you want to look at. Our surveys were very specific. However, they were not tell us what to keep, tell us what not to have anymore, because that's not going to work. But they were between safety in the building and athletics, which is more important to you. And it was more, getting the value, getting the critical thought of, okay, if we have literally run out of dollars for the very top things that we need, what are the things that we're reluctantly not going to be able to do and get help. I will also tell you that you're more likely to have people at your public hearing when you're cutting the budget than necessarily when you're maintaining what you've been doing, or if you're lucky enough to be adding things. Although when you're adding, you get folks who come and advocate for what they want added. So I guess this is my question. It looks on the face of it, and Lori, you're very astute. It looks on the face of it that you, on average, think you're doing pretty well on creating these conditions. Are there any concerns that you want to talk about in your job of creating those conditions, since it seems that you do have, at least on some of the questions, a little bit different view? Catherine.
Well, I just want, can we just back to the seeks the public input during the budget process?
Of course.
I may have been the one that put the one, I don't know, but because I interpret that as when, okay, we're going to set up our budget. Let's go ask the public what they want, and we don't do that. That's never been a thing. So I think maybe it was an interpretation, because that's the way I see that. Like, we got to set up a budget now. Let's go ask the public what they want and how they want it spent. And that's not something that we do. So I think possibly, I don't know if that was, but it would have been that interpretation of it that would have caused me to put a one if that was the case. I don't know. Yeah.
So
I might, sorry,
I just need to ask.
yeah, go.
So as you become more familiar with how the budget works and all the various pieces and what you're going to be doing, is that a significant concern to you that the district doesn't go out at the beginning of the process and say, tell us what you want in the budget?
No, I think that would be ridiculous. So that's why I think it was an interpretation.
Yeah, I was going to say, all of these things like surveys, they're clues, they're not scientific, even if you set them up scientifically. So what is public input to a budget? You talk about it being on cuts. I think actually what is legitimate is when we're talking about changing programs. what's there and what's not there, what's added, what's taken away. And I don't think we've done much, if in virtually nothing of that recently. So the next step is you change the education techniques within something that you're doing. That is the superintendent's responsibility. The superintendent is the expert. I mean, this board approves the curriculum, but the superintendent, we defer to education experts in choosing what your math or literacy program is. And the public might be keen on it or not, but I think that's a division of responsibility between board and superintendent. Is the other one, talking more from a budget person's point of view, is the public does not determine what your wage increase is or what your percent inflation is, or all the economic parameters that go in that come out of the state. On the other hand, the public has a lot of input in the strategic plan and the goals, and you might do surveys and use that and have gone through an equity plan or a strategic plan. So there are a whole bunch of semantics about what is public input. But the reason I went to that is to say that the part of a topic that public puts input can really matter. The public input might be in strategy, but it's not in what your negotiating rate and assumption is. And those are different things.
And to Martin's point, about the 5 questions, I made a note. I think that's great. Yeah, what you should, your board having 5 questions. We haven't had that experience for somebody to come in and say, I want this, and for us to apply the 5 questions. I get not any time that I've been here that I can recall. So I think that's great. But again, we haven't had that really happen necessarily.
No, we haven't. And I think actually we were not mature enough a year ago to deal with it, quite honestly. You know, we were forming and growing. And I think I like to feel that I have colleagues around the table right now that we know how to work with each other better than a year ago, and call it the maturity to deal with that kind of thing.
Yeah, I have maybe a little bit of a broader perspective on our duties during the budget process to the community, because our budgeting process starts with our strategic plan, really. What do we say are our big 6? What is our promise? And then our job is to align where we spend our resources to our strategic plan, and to hold our system accountable, you know, for that. That's why student data, student performance is really important, because we need to know whether or not we're achieving what we said we were going to do in our strategic plan, review our progress, and then realign our resources. And that's a continuous process. That's not something that happens just because you're going to start looking at the budget. You know, combine that with the labor groups and the, you know, IPDs and, you know, mistakes that occur. And, you know, I mean, we've got to face those issues. But also, so our outreach to the community, we want community input during the strategic planning process, because that is where the community tells us where they support us spending our money. And it also helps us to develop our campaign messaging for our M&O levies and our bonds. You know, what did our strategic plan say? What did our community say to inform the strategic plan? How are we doing? Where should we adjust? And what do we need to really implement it well? That's where our levies and our community really come in. So that was my thought on that.
Absolutely. And the fact that you have just completed a strategic plan means you've had a lot of community input. You've heard a lot from your community, and you have a solid basis on which to go forward. It doesn't mean that you don't do checks periodically to make sure that that's still where the community is, or that how you are going about implementing it is the way that the community thought you were going to do it. And the other thing that I would say is remember the community is everybody and not necessarily the people that you hear from. So, Catherine.
To Laura's point, the second note I made was your suggestion of aligning the agenda items with each one of the, say, the big six or whatever. So it is easier to go back and refer, all right, are we succeeding here? Because this effectively improve, one of the big six, or so that's another very good suggestion.
Which came from one of my superintendents, so I can't really claim it, but I'll share it. So a couple of things sort of in the middle of the summary document that jumped out at me were communicating your rationale for making decisions. And the challenge there, I think, for all of us is that we think we get a lot of information. We think really hard about the decisions that we're going to make, but we want to be really efficient at our board meetings. We really do not want to have to bring pajamas and teddy bears to our board meetings. So we often don't articulate why it is we're doing what we're doing, or why we're voting yes, especially why we're voting yes. Most of us are pretty good on articulating why we feel we need to vote against something. But when it comes to voting yes, we often don't say why. And I would encourage you, even though it adds maybe 5 minutes to each item on your agenda, to take that opportunity. And it doesn't need to be all 5 of you. It can certainly be 1 or 2 of you, and you're all really good at the body language communications of nodding and that kind of thing. So you can convey your agreement with what's being said. But it's important for your community to know, first of all, that you spent some time making the decision, and it's not just because your superintendent put it on the agenda and so this is the next thing that needs to be done. And secondly, that you have a particular reason, whether it's this supports number 4 on the big 6, or we heard loud and clear from the community that they want us to be keeping this in mind, or this is going to keep us financially sound, or whatever it is. The other one that you said you weren't really sure, you had a division of viewpoints, is whether you use written protocols for your interactions. And I don't know if you have written protocols. And often when you have new board members, you either develop those or you review them. And there are things like no surprises, don't come to a board meeting and give me a booklet. I have seen this at a board meeting. I'm not making this up. Somebody had a particular issue and they put all of the information together for their fellow board members, passed it out, and then moved to add that particular topic to the agenda for some kind of a decision. And the other board members were like deer in headlights, and basically said, oh, we need more time with this. But it made the board look very dysfunctional to everybody else. But agreements like, I can speak for the board if I'm the board president, or I can officially, or I can share what the board's view is on this topic. But if I'm being asked as a representative of the board, it is the board's decision that I am sharing and supporting. It's not my saying, well, I voted against that and I think that's the stupidest thing we've ever done. So that's kind of what protocols are like.
I'd like to make a comment on that because I think it's relevant, makes me think of something. 3 years ago, Laura, we had quite a lot of division And after that, we actually have written protocols that I still have at the front of my board package, but I don't think we've actually highlighted them recently. And along with orientation, it would be a very good idea to do that. And you might notice that 21 was set up for self-assessment. That was the final nail in building a staircase from those written protocols to getting a cohesive board, if I remember rightly.
And that would be something that reviewing what's there and talking about whether or not all of them are still needed. We just did that on our board, and one of them, we looked at it, and it was a circumstance that came up at the time that we updated the protocols that we needed to deal with. We don't need to deal with it anymore. It's become institutionalized. And so we were able to actually cross off one of our protocols. We were very excited until we added 3 more. So we went from 10 to 13, but we changed out 1. But it's your operating agreements. It's what you commit to one another that you'll hold yourself and others too. And it may be that what was adopted a couple of years ago still works just great for you. It may be that, no, you want to talk about this and you want to have new operating agreements. I don't know if you plan a winter retreat or a workshop that actually is really just focused on you as a board, not on learning things that are happening in the schools or the district or any of that, but it's how you work together, what your aspirations are between now and the end of your year, which is the end of August, or if you've already done that, or you have goals, sort of a mid-year evaluation of how that's going. Some boards do that. Sometimes they take just a work session to do that. Sometimes in long past years, a board retreat maybe was 1 or 2 days, even with some significant training, maybe on a particular issue. When PLCs were first coming in, big training on that, and then where the board fits in all of that. Real often you can do that in a couple hours of a work session if you're really focused. So that might be something that you want to think about as well.
I don't know what that was.
Okay. I don't know. Always a super overachiever.
I've had one I've been sitting on when we were looking at the first 2 pages, and it wasn't one of the highlighted ones, but one that struck me as interesting in our responses was it's question 4. We base our decisions on what is best for student success. And every single one of us gave us the same ranking, that it was always, or most of the time. So in my mind, I feel like our responsibility is to make that always. And so what do we do to make sure that that answer is always across the board?
That's a wonderful question. Could I ask you if, because all of you said most of the time, were you thinking of a particular circumstance where you made the decision based on other factors? I'm not saying that you totally disregarded the student's success, but you were focused on other factors and didn't really think about this being a thing. Let's say it's buying a bus. Okay, maybe I'm not thinking of student success necessarily when I'm buying a bus. I'm thinking, is this a good, safe bus? Is it a good price? Is it that kind of thing? I mean, was that maybe something that was in your head? Or do you think that sometimes you should have been thinking about what's best for student success and that's gotten lost somewhere? Maria?
Yeah, I think when I was answering this questions, I thought of us as a whole, as a board. One of the things we talked about is wraparound services. I think there's a divide whether we think that we as a school district need to be providing social emotional learning, housing program benefits, those wraparound services. I'm sorry, can't think of the one. Anyways, so I think there's a divide whether we feel that everybody on our board feels that we should be providing those services in our buildings, whether it's the responsibility of the community or the school district. And we had our Senator Fred Hawkins come talk to us not that long ago, and that was one of the things that was just briefly discussed. Unfortunately, I think our community agencies are tapped, and anybody in education knows that children can't learn if they're hungry. Children can't learn if they have an unstable home environment. So as a district, if we look at the child as a whole, I think there's benefit in providing those support services. And so that question specifically, that's how I answered it and why I answered the way I did.
Thank you very much for sharing. Martin?
I think you're right, actually, and what Julie said was great, because that's what we really believe. But then we do have to superimpose differences in beliefs, call them ideology, and disagreements as to where student success ends, where let's call them criteria for responsible governance ends. And I think talking to our senator who talked about budgeting and what schools should do and what schools shouldn't do is a good illustration of why you can say some of the time there will almost all of the time there'll be some issues where somebody thinks there is a difference between what the schools should be doing or law versus wishes of parents in a community. That's another one. So I think I don't want to play it. I think we have to learn to live with a range of ideologies. So does everybody in any democratic country. And that's part of why I think you would get that put in. And respect those differences.
I think also, sometimes what I might think is best for students is not where the money is, for example. So could we make a decision that was best for each student? Sure, but how are we going to pay for it? So in that instance, I might say, did we make this a decision that was best for students? No. But I do think that aligning our agendas to our big six could help us make everybody feel like we are doing that 100% of the time.
Good clarification there.
No, Maria.
Talking about the board agendas. I think the other thing is that recognizing that you take into account what will support student success or what might hamper student success as you're making your various decisions. Especially when you have tight budgets, sometimes the decision you make will not further student success, and it may actually hamper it a little bit. But you have done it in the best way that you can. You've eliminated as many negative impacts as you can in making this difficult decision. That's still basing your decision basing it on what it is that's best for student success. So it's keeping that idea in mind. And sometimes you can find some really creative answers. Maybe they come from your staff, maybe they come from your community who offer a partnership when they see what that issue is. But when you're talking about this is going to make it harder for our kids to succeed, but we really don't have a choice. Our merchants are not excited when we pass, photocopied dollar bills. They really don't like that. Okay, are you comfortable with moving to the last page? So the red ones, and it's always so interesting how we mark things that we don't seem to do as well in red. I think it goes, for me, it goes back to first grade where my teacher had a red pencil and she always let us know the things that we made mistakes on. But Martin's already addressed a couple of things and it looks like you've already looked at and addressed them. That first one, the orientation of new board members. One of the things is that the majority of you really are still new board members. You're in your first term. So you have the opportunity to do orientation for each other. It would not be fair to call upon Laura to be the person doing the orientation. But the other thing that I point out to you, from what I'm hearing here, you guys basically do orientation for each other as you discuss. Laura brings the historical information forward, as well as that really broad, I've been doing this for a while and it's sunk in what my job is kind of thing. The others of you have perspectives, but you also ask questions about why or how. And so especially when you have a large number on your board that are new in your first term, that's another way that you can do orientation. A lot of it does fall to your superintendent and his staff because they explain what they do. And it would not be good, even though I've been on the board for a very long time, to ask me to explain what the senior staff at my district does to a new board member. That would not be fair to the senior staff because I would only get about a third, I'm sure, of all the great stuff that they do. But I do like the fact that you're working on an orientation, especially as you're looking at the you're all up for election. Hopefully you won't need, if you want to stay, hopefully you won't need orientation of anybody new, but maybe you will have somebody new and you're preparing for that. So if you take a couple minutes, I don't think you need 5 because there's only a few there, and look at the ones that you don't think you're doing as well on. And see if you still agree with that answer. That'll be the first question.
For me personally, the last one actually, I think a few of us had the opportunity to attend WASDA in person. And that was a very eye-opening experience to be there in person versus virtual the last couple years. And I think it allowed for a lot of this cross collaboration with colleagues around the state, even in our region. Also last year, I got to participate in I was a director on the legislative director district for District 7. And there was a lot of time invested in that, where there was a lot of collaboration literally across the state. And then the smaller committees within the district. So had I not experienced those two things in the last couple of years, or more recently, I could see why, I would rank it lower than, but that's definitely one that now with all the restrictions going away, COVID is just kind of not the forefront of everything we do. I think, yeah, I would definitely rate that higher.
I don't know if I would rate it higher, but I was also looking at that one because I think the last few years as a board, we've been missing the boat on state and national trainings that, we look at the importance of professional development for our staff. And if we don't take those opportunities to be involved in state and national conferences in particular, we're not doing ourselves any favors in regards to professional development. We're not getting it. And, you can save a few dollars by cutting it out, but what is it costing our district overall if we're not really well informed about what we're doing?
And there are, thank you very much for the opening. I am supposed to share with you the numerous opportunities that WASDA has for you. But there are quite a number, and some of them support legal requirements that the legislature has put on us. So keep your eyes open for that. Another opportunity right now, because the legislature is in session, is that on Thursdays at noon, there is a 1 hour, it's not really a webinar, but it's a session, and during the legislative session, it's put on by our two legislative advocates, Marissa and Logan, and they talk about what's going on the Hill right now, and they get feedback from districts on what the impacts of those various bills will be. And if you just go to the WASDA website and look for, I think they're called legislative updates, you can sign up. And if nothing else, you will learn what's going on at the legislature, and you will also learn some of the pros and cons that other school districts are seeing across the state. And that's been very helpful to me over the years, because sometimes a school district will be experiencing something that we aren't experiencing yet. And you kind of get a heads up of what might be coming and of some good solutions. Also, it's a great way to be able to help advocate for statewide needs that school districts have. How about the 1/3 from the bottom, involving your stakeholders in the district's vision? Do you think your strategic plan addressed that?
Historical perspective. I've been through a couple rounds of that, and there's at least one instance in my memory where we just hit it out of the park in terms of getting the community involved in our strategic planning process. And other years, not so much, but it's one of the things that I'm really interested in interviewing superintendent candidates. What is your strategic planning strategy and process? Because actual relevant, authentic engagement of the community is key and primarily important. I wouldn't give our last round an A+. It is.
Come out of COVID, we've all got a lot of things on our plate.
And
Maybe that's not the answer.
one of the other things about strategic planning, if you truly want to get input that's authentic, you have to go get it from people. And that costs money. You can't rely on folks being interested in your survey. You know, you need to actively grab people that represent constituencies that you want to hear from and get them involved. And
Yeah.
it costs money.
Laura touches on part of, there's almost like two thoughts in this question, and it's, are we just going through the motion of including stakeholders? Yeah, we do that periodically, but who are those stakeholders and how are we doing it? I think is maybe a broader way to look at the question, where I think, how are we forming these groups? Who are these groups? How are we communicating to these groups? What feedback are we getting from these groups? And so is that a meaningful process? And so at that level, I think that's probably why we're seeing lower scores, because we're not maybe going to the broadest groups or doing the best we can to engage stakeholders in some things, but are we having stakeholder processes periodically? Yeah.
I want to go back to collaborating with the very last one. Sorry, the professional development and not using national and other fora. There's a real effort and time dilemma between, yes, WASDA's great, go to the conference, read all the headlines and see what people are talking about, NSBA, or do you go and bury yourself in seminar after seminar after seminar when many of them are actually clones? I'm giving a harsh view of it. The other way that you can use your energy as a board member is get out into the community. Maybe be a volunteer in something that happens once a week for an hour or two. Maybe sit on the sidelines of a parent committee, athletics, getting to know the people who are parents and others, being a good ambassador when you talk and listen to the institutions of the community, both NGOs and that. To me personally, I give much more priority to that. As long as I get enough external, I think I'm going to put all my power into trying to get the stuff internally. And yeah, that's 1 person in 5 and you're ready to absorb it. But it's just so that you have better judgment. Now, that's not the same as going out and getting full stakeholder input, which is difficult. You heard the silence when we talked about, I think that this comment here comes from a certain, let's say, something that's gone downriver of differences about how you got stakeholder input for the strategic plan. I think there were some differences as to how widespread what that was and how controlled it was. I'm going to put something optimistic. I don't know what the rest of the board thinks, but we put out a survey and it was just a survey. And I'll say one thing, we got 7 replies to the Spanish survey. We got 276 or something to the English survey. So which group of people are not responding to the survey? Now, admittedly, a lot of people of Spanish speaking origins actually are very good at using English. So you can't do that. But no, we did have that. So Laura's comment about going out and getting the information is really, really important. We've talked about some of the things being continuous, but I actually think the survey we got for the information, and we had 23 small groups give input to the 2 consultants for our superintendent search. I'm much more excited to getting clues out of that, quite honestly, than I was out of the strategic plan. And I publicly stated that I think this is a gem that we can build on. It's clues. We see things where we're being criticized, and I'm talking about us, everybody. We see things that people are enthusiastic. We see us going in the same direction. We see places where we're behind. We can constructively take it. And then you've got to sort out, sometimes a comment comes because somebody really knows it and it's valid. And sometimes they've got a misconception, and you don't get upset if they've got a misconception and they use some tough words, or if they're telling the truth and they use tough words, you can work it together. So the reason for all of that is I think it's a continuous use of that information. So what I see in the bottom one are some of the most difficult things to do. And it doesn't surprise me that it's difficult to go spend extra time on professional development. But if the teachers have got to do it, we've got to lift ourselves up and at least get to first base. So I think it's a good that we need to deserve. But getting stakeholders, I'm not sure whether I'm right or wrong, but I do not have a favorable memory of the time we used professional consultants and focus groups. So I think sometimes you're going to have a difference. And I was not directly involved. I just saw the end product. So I think you're going to have a difference about what is good and what is bad going out and getting information from the community. And that'll always be there. Different people have different criteria. That was really what I'm saying, that linking it to what's difficult as to how it is to get input, and a reminder that seeing how elementary students have to get to school and what they have to learn and what the teacher has to do is as valuable as reading and going to a seminar. But I have a much easier time than my other four colleagues. But it's very difficult for them to do that. And somehow, and here's something else, pacing is the word I've been using recently. I'm looking right at our superintendent now. Our staff have been dealing with change. I've been dealing with COVID. Everybody needs to be paced right now. So we've got to work at a way where we keep the energy going. And sorry, what all of those things go together. And I think there's a lot of that on the bottom in the red.
One of the things that I think you have an opportunity, and Martin, one of the things that he talked about is in your hiring the new superintendent. You're obviously into that process now. You've had the initial surveys go out and what have you. Okay. As you're engaging your community or making opportunities for your community, however it is that you have your your superintendent hiring plan set up, whether there's going to be a time for the candidates to answer questions from the community or answer questions from you in front of the community, or however you do that, that's another opportunity to engage your community in setting the vision, because they'll help you understand. They'll tell you what they're looking for in a superintendent that will help you with the idea of the vision. I agree that you don't have to go to a seminar or to even a conference to do that last one. I think one of the things that you're already doing, if you are having work sessions, for example, on what is social emotional learning, or what is a PLC, that's the same kind of thing that you would go to a training about, and you rely on the folks in your district who are implementing that. If you're doing multiple strategies for supporting students as they're encountering challenges, knowing what your teachers are doing, knowing what the underlying philosophy of that is. Certainly starting there so that you have the information about what your staff is doing in the district and why they're doing it will help you make your decisions. It will also build your relationship with your staff as you make difficult decisions. If you've listened to them and heard what SEL means in the Wenatchee School District, what success in English language acquisition for your non-English for your students who don't speak English as a first language. What those kinds of things are, you build that connection to your staff, which then builds, that relationship is incredibly important and spreads out then into your community as well. So yes, being connected and advocating. I mean, if you've already talked to your senator, you're in the loop in advocating for things that are going on and the challenges that you've had. And you don't have to always do it personally. If you have stories to share, and you all have life that goes on outside of school boarding. I think you were supposed to give that up when you ran and got elected, but okay. You can certainly share, especially those advocacy stories, with the Ledge Committee. You have two folks from your greater area that serve on the Ledge Committee. And you can certainly share your stories with them. Or if there's a real hot button issue and you would like to testify, you let the WASDA advocacy people know. They are looking for people who have something going on in their district that connects to a bill or whatever, that tells the story. So you don't have to necessarily travel to San Diego and go to the NSBA conference or whatever. The last one that I'd like you to think about is right in the middle of the page, and that's question number 9, setting goals for yourselves. And they word it for your improvement. Sometimes maintaining how well you're doing is a good goal to have, especially as you're struggling with whatever issues might be in your community. But based on what you've seen in the things that you said you thought you were doing pretty well, sort of those middle ground ones, and then the last ones where you ranked yourself lower. And I'm not asking you to look at the last ones and say, oh, okay, we need to have a goal on that, because, you know, that's a low number. 2.2 is a really low number. I don't want to have. That doesn't necessarily mean you should have a goal around it. Maybe it is not something that you need to be focusing on right now. And as long as it's not a 0, you're feeling like we're okay in that area right now. But as you're looking for a new superintendent, you having goals for you all, whether it's how you look at things, how you make decisions, how you formulate your agenda, what professional development you want to have, what you want the community to basically say about your board, or whatever. Is that something that you are considering doing? You've been thinking about? You are not in a place to do right now? I know that Martin would like to talk about some goals, but I don't know whether, and not necessarily specific goals, but just the idea of having goals. I'm just not sure where the rest of you are.
And I introduce this, and I think it'll be in a pretty fuzzy way that you can take it in lots of directions. So everything I'm about to say came into my brain because of what you said around the table right now. I think it'd be very difficult for us to write formal goals in the way that a CEO writes goals for an enterprise or the superintendent writes it for the school district. But as we've gone through this, we've seen what I would call zones of attention, like, I'm trying to think of one. Anyway, it doesn't matter, that where we either are doing well or not doing, or could do some more work on. And we could look at the district's the Big Six's strategic plan. We could look at the superintendent's goals, which we all know, and have some broad areas of attention where we could help support that. Well, I know a good one. I think I've heard a lot about how we can message much better to the community and how important that is for levies and bonds in the future. So consciously, and how we can present things in the board meeting, there might be, and that could be one, somewhere between 3 and 5 zones of area where we pay a bit more attention. I'll just pick that one as an easy one, that we're going to think about how we're going to message more strongly, more focused, or the other one we're talking about is really being concerned with the achievements of instruction and the results of the students. There you go, Laura. And maybe we could either have a workshop and brainstorm it, or some of us could just do what we sometimes do, put in 2 or 3 priorities to the executive assistant, and then somebody could just sort out what are the priority ones. We don't have to go through so much of a process, but I think there could be something valuable that directs our attention. So that's really what I want to ask it. Do we want goals, or do we just want to, amongst ourselves, at regular intervals, say these are areas that want to be areas of focus right now, and they're kind of fuzzy support things over what the superintendent and the strat plan's doing.
But this is kind of that. In a self-evaluation, you're looking at where your strengths are, where you feel like we're doing well and where you're not. So that does kind of put the attention on those few items like you're talking about, and would be easy to do, I think, after this.
I mean, another thought, it could be as simple as follow up to what everybody's talked about today. If we don't follow up, we don't have any goals. If we follow up, we have the equivalent of goals.
So if you were going to follow up, what would be 1 or 2 or 3 things? You don't want to have more than 3. I'm just thinking of the juggler trying to keep the balls moving, but 1 or 2 or 3 things that have come out of your discussion that kind of rose to the top for you, that you would like to pay a little more attention to, maybe is a good way to put it.
I have 2 suggestions. Again, as the newest school board member, organizing our orientation for whoever comes next, I think is pretty important. It doesn't have to be a mass, event, but just a little bit of order. Okay, you should do this and you should do this, get a little direction would be great. And then in terms of communicating with the larger community, something we had talked about, but we still haven't done, and I think would be great is a town hall. You spoke about town halls that you've had since I've been here. We haven't had one. I don't know if you have in the past, or I think I think that is a great idea, particularly while we have Bill here to answer everybody's questions when they come to town hall.
Other thought. Let me ask this question, because I've heard the word communication come up pretty much a lot, I guess is a good way to put it. Do you feel that is an area that you want to work on, to do more communication or more effective communication?
I think so. I think as nice as it is to have sometimes a short, quiet board meeting, sometimes we don't do the best job anymore of communicating why we're doing things, what we're doing and why we're doing things. And I remember I used to, when I first started on the board, had it's something I tell my clients in my practice is ask questions you already know the answer to, so then the public knows that you've thought it through. So even if I'm sitting there, I've read the packet, I know everything in front of me, the public doesn't know that I've asked all these questions or that we've thought these things through. So they're just, we're quickly passing a consent agenda that has 90% of the financing and contracts and everything of relevance to district operations, but we haven't, for efficiency, actually discussed it. So we don't get a lot of opportunities the way our meetings are sort of structured. But it is something when we had opportunities like that, I was trying to be more intentional about asking questions I already knew the answer to, but I wanted to make sure the public knew we had thought about it. So it's kind of getting back to that. it's nice to be done fairly quickly, and we've got some big meaty things now with budget and whatnot, updates that we need to hear from. So it's, yeah, we don't want to be spending all night at a board meeting, but it's maybe finding that balance of how do we communicate a little bit better on some of these even more routine things we're doing to ensure that the community knows we've thought about it. And even so we can ask ourselves, maybe the second part of that is this in the best interest, or how does this further our students, and getting that more to the front of the mind as well. So I don't know. Communication, though, seems like a pretty important theme.
I think the public doesn't know much about the good things that are in the consent agenda. I think you really hit on pay dirt on that comment. We do have board communication at the end of the meeting. Board members could take advantage of that. I'm going to get back to the superintendent search survey, and was talked about what they want out of communication, and the words came out like real, authentic, et cetera, et cetera. Got to be very careful with communication that you're not grandstanding. But at the same time, don't be so humble that you miss the message. And I think we probably are in a good position now to know how to put those two hazards aside and get it in the middle. And we've had some good lessons from somebody across the table.
So from what I'm hearing, you're thinking of ways to make your board meeting more of a communication platform, both to the board, so you know more about things. And obviously that will also share out in your community as your staff presents more information to you for some of these meaty issues that are coming up. But also for you to have comments as you're making decisions, or to have discussion about, well, so we're not doing this anymore. What is the impact? Who does that impact? Or whatever discussion you feel is appropriate. I also heard you talk about other ways to communicate with your community. And so that might be something that you want to think about. Building on your hiring the superintendent, you will do a number of things that are forms of communication with your public. As you're doing them, think about whether or not that's something that could be translated into some other issue. Technology, or getting ready to put out a levy. Most of us determine what we're going to put out for the levy and then go and ask our public to support it. Maybe you want to think about whether using the something like the process that you're using now for who should we hire as the superintendent, to also get feedback about, well, what should we do with the levy? Not how much should it be, but what should we do with the levy, which is the funding beyond what the state and the federal government gives us, especially if you've had to cut. What kinds of things do we want restored? What kinds of things are we finding, you know what? We would rather do robotics than underwater basket weaving. Some of you can tell my age by some of the phrases that I use. But get that input. And then when you say in your levy, this will allow us to have robotics for our kids, or this will allow us to add coding at middle school and high school for our kids. The community will have already said, yes, we find that valuable. So two things, they're telling you probably something that you already know, but they don't need to know that. And secondly, now they've told you and you're saying, oh yes, well then we'll put that in the levy. That's how we'll be able to do it. And so it builds that support, but it's authentic because it is true input from your community, and it is truly the way you'll be able to provide for it. Your basic education funding is going to provide for those kinds of things. So anything else? other than the orientation. It sounds to me like y'all are working on that. You do have a unique opportunity in that Catherine has either gone through or not gone through an orientation, and may have some suggestions. And also the fact that some of you are not that far away from having just come on the board, and may have some ideas about, gee, I really wish in the first 3 months I had known this. I applaud you that you have sort of subgroups that work on things and then come back and report out to the whole board, and then you finalize it. Not all boards do that. And so you can get a lot more work done that way if you have volunteers who are willing to do it, if that's comfortable for your whole board. So we've got about 12 minutes. How do you feel about going through the self-evaluation process? Has it been valuable for you? I don't mean doing this with me, but the having the questions, doing the reflection, looking at the different categories, and thinking about your work as a board together, your personal contribution to that work. Has doing the self-evaluation and then talking through it been valuable, even a little bit?
I think in part what's been valuable to me is to see that we really feel sort of aligned a lot more than I would sometimes expect on paper. I really didn't see a lot of like 1s and 4s. And so it shows me that I think we all generally, there's various areas where we may feel more or less strongly that something is or isn't happening. But for the most part, it felt like we were sort of groups in the 2s to 3s, 3s to 4s, a lot closer, very little disparity in general. So I think that signals a board that's working pretty well together in the big picture.
Something that I saw as well, and especially with a relatively young board, that is a major accomplishment. And even if you don't agree on what the policy should be, you have differences of opinion. If you agree on the process and you agree on the collaboration and respect part of it, then you can work together, and you can have a vote 4-1, 3-2 that is not a contentious vote. It is a vote of conscience, or it's a vote of your held belief. But it doesn't divide you. You're able to carry on then and get the rest of the work done, which is very different from when it is contentious. And one of the important things that I learned over the years is don't wait for the perfect answer. Get the best answer you can get now with what you have and what you need to accomplish. And particularly in education in today's world with all of the challenges we have, that's one that I remind myself of quite a bit. Anything else, Maria? How do you feel about the self-evaluation, especially as the president? How does this help you?
I think that, overall, I think this has been very productive. Personally, the best one we've had yet. I have a list of boxes that we need to check off, kind of a little bit of homework to do on ways how we can, improve the system. I agree with the organization of the new board onboarding. We do have board norms and principles, but yes, it's been 3 years since we've reviewed them. I think when Julie and I first got on board was the last time we visited those, and they're in our board material every meeting. But you know, how many of them can we check off the list because it's become part of the norm, right? Like you mentioned. So we do have a little bit of work. I wholeheartedly agree with Martin when he says, you know, the ones in red are the ones that are the hardest. And it's a short list, but it's a big list to tackle. So if we do decide to do goal setting, out of those, one or two that we can, you know, intentionally focus on and move forward. And there's some that honestly, looking at the answers, it's like, well, I think 4 or 3 of us said, don't know. Okay, well, why do we not know? Is it because something we don't do, or is it because we need more information on that? In general, very productive meeting, short to-do list, and I think you've left us with good information on moving forward to, you know, build this up even more.
You have some historical perspective, and you've worked with more than one board before, obviously, because every time one new person comes in, it's a new board, right? How are you feeling about the discussion today and where you think everybody's headed?
I love this time where the board just gets to talk about how the board works together. I have always enjoyed, even in more contentious times, that opportunity, because I think it helps us become a better, more well-oiled machine, and not that we have to abdicate our own personal feelings about a particular topic or opinion, because we don't. But if we can work together respectfully, like you said, it's a really good thing. The board experience, even if you don't agree with everyone all the time, can still be a great experience. And I think it should be.
Julie, anything more that you want to share as we wrap up?
Not anything significant, but I've been kind of laughing to myself a little bit because the orientation that Maria and I did get when we were new board members, because we were appointed together. You mentioned we can cross some of the things off, and I think that will probably become apparent, because I remember on my first day of this board meeting reading this going, do they think I'm a bad person? With these self-evaluations and make sure we speak and phones over here and things like that. And it was clearly written in a context of a board before us wasn't necessarily behaving how they should be. And so our first day was okay. So I laugh a little when I think about the board norms, but anyway, so.
Well, maybe you can move on to higher order thinking norms, if you will. I don't know, but that very often is the time that protocols are brought together, is sort of as rules of, okay, we're not getting along, so we're going to set the rules of the game so that everybody knows them, so that you know, it's not a surprise to me that you think that I should not talk again until somebody else on the board talks.
It comes through a
or
process
something like that.
Comes through a process of bloodletting, I'm going to say.
Martin?
I do have one other value that I got out of this is it's a very comprehensive set of questions. And there are things there that have slipped out of your vision that you're not paying attention to, because there are so many things to do. So it's been useful to find out certain areas that we haven't been focused on. Let's say you're focusing totally on change and implementing, but you're taking your eye off the results of what you implemented a year ago. So this is a good way of looking at the whole thing and reminding ourselves to do that.
Thank you. I will take that feedback back to WASDA, and they will be happy to hear that it was valuable to you. As you go through your next steps, if there are things that I or somebody else from the WASDA training group can do for you, please let us know. It was a beautiful drive to get here. I'd be more than happy to come back if there were some next steps. I'm sort of envisioning that your focus is going to be on getting your new superintendent and in addressing your budget. And that those are going to take, those two things are huge and will take up a significant amount of your time. But will also mean for you that your relationships among you will grow as you go through those two very challenging responsibilities. So I'm very impressed with each of you and also with your cohesiveness as a board, and yet that you are each individually strong and advocate for your own positions. And that only makes your board stronger and only makes your district stronger. So that's not a bad thing at all. So anything else that I can do for you before I leave?
Thank you so much for being here.
My honor, my privilege.
And thank you, yes.
Great. If there's no other questions, this meeting is adjourned.